Good morning. This is the Wrong Hero, and I am not very happy to be talking. Hello. Goodbye. Me thirsty. Me want glass of sand. Hi, I'm the Wrong Hero. And these are just a few of my many Hollywood friends. Well, some of them may never actually have performed in Hollywood, but nevertheless, this being a democracy and all, perhaps at one time or another they deserve to. Anyway, I am not going to mince words. I will shout this from the other room. Hi, I'm the Wrong Hero, and I'm your Shadow Heritage spokesman, which coincidentally enough for the purposes of this broadcast also happens to be the title of this particular presentation. And so without much further ado, Shadow Heritage Spokesman. Yes, America. It was a proud land, a free land, a newly freed land, and eventually, of course, half of its population was embroiled in slavery of one kind or another. And then there came the progressive era, and Teddy Roosevelt was shot, but his thick speech protected him. And then World War One, and flappers, which is basically like women with short hair wearing funny hats, and smoking cigarettes and drinking bootleg liquor for the first time. And then the Depression, it was like America was on a manic depressive course, and then another war, and then, here's what kills me though. World War II fashions, like those horrible hats with the sharp brims and stuff, and the long coats that women used to wear, and always smelling like talcum powder and cheap perfume, and just these people were animals. They were just so primitive. I just don't understand. It was only in the 1950s that the first glimpses or glimmerings of modernity began to surface. And of course, the 1960s with ridiculous psychedelic clown outfits, and the 1970s with even more ridiculous psychedelic clown outfits, and finally we get a little bit towards what we are working on now, the 80s, which were, I guess, pretty normal. I mean, there wasn't much difference between the 80s and the 90s. Except, of course, for the omnipresent computer and its pals. So, anyhow, I am your Shadow Heritage spokesman. And, Freeman Dyson says that the world will be rid of nuclear weapons in 100 years. Of course, that may very well happen because the world is destroyed by nuclear weapons, and in the process of destroying the world with the nuclear weapons, we will also destroy the nuclear weapons. Duh! So, anyhow, did you know that hedadactyly, which is six-fingered dwarfism, did you know that six-fingered dwarfism is especially prevalent among the Amish of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania? Well, it's true. Now, you may be walking down the street in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and there's all these cats that don't wear buttons, but instead use hooks to attach their clothing, and they have these big old hats, and they have long beards, and they smoke pipes, and they drive horse-drawn wagons, and they say thee and thou a lot. But every now and then you might notice that one of them is kind of stumpy and has 6 fingers on one hand. I guess they put him to work as the concert pianist. But anyway, that is an example of hedadactyly, which is the six-fingered dwarfism, especially prevalent among the Amish of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Now, we are assured that until about 1,300 years ago, all humans on Earth were divided into small, local populations of hunter-gatherers, probably each with its own private genes. However, since then, continental human populations have undergone three successive waves of homogenization. Number one, the expansion of territory of the earliest farmers at the expense of the hunter-gatherers, and that's about where the Amish are. And, talk about your private genes. I mean, the six-fingered dwarfism, if that's not an example of private genes, then I don't know what. I mean, six-fingered dwarfism doesn't really confer that great in a genetic advantage unless, of course, you're looking for people who know how to dismantle bombs who can crawl into extremely small spaces and, with their extra nimble sixth finger, have that much more, that many more tools to work with when tearing wires out. Number two, the formation of political states which promoted intermarriage among a state's people circa 3000 BC as opposed to the farmers pushing out the hunter-gatherers which occurred about 5 to 10,000 years ago. And number three, the one following airplanes and Coca-Cola across oceans and large land masses and producing genetic melting pots on Hawaii and elsewhere. But the world's people have a long way to go before all human populations become coffee-colored and share similar gene frequencies, says Jared Diamond, writing in the New York Review of Books of March 6, 1997. So, anyway, hi, I'm the Wrong Hero, your Shadow Heritage spokesman. Now, some possible titles for this presentation that I ended up not using were Mad Fun, Time Past, More Than a Treat of Food, Flop Artist, To You, US Number 2, Beware the Patience of an Angry Man, Fractional Reserve, Force, Supermax, and there are others, but I am going to use those in subsequent weeks, so I won't give away the store just yet. I'm so sleepy. I'm sorry. I should try to stay awake for this. Now, in Nauru, the affluent Pacific Islanders shop in supermarkets and are freed of the hard work of farming and fishing. More than one half of all adults survive after the age of 60 end up diabetic. Now, as long as I'm on this tack of Shadow Heritage spokesman, let us talk a little of John Wayne. I meant to read that book by Gary Wills about John Wayne, but somehow, with my other 61 books that I have checked out of the Providence College Library, in addition as well as the 4 books I have out from the University of Rhode Island, plus the about half dozen or so books that I have checked out from the John F. Kennedy School of Government, plus the 1 or 2 books that I have checked out from Rhode Island College, I just don't seem to have the time to do this, read all this stuff. Anyway, John Wayne embodies the American myth in much the same way that these pictures of our friends, which I present to you as my title and duties of Shadow Heritage spokesman compel me to, John Wayne embodies the American myth in much the same way. The archetypal American is a displaced person, arriving from a rejected past, breaking into a glorious future on the move, fearless himself, feared by others, a killer, but cleansing the world of things that need killing, loving but not bound down by love, rootless but carrying the center in himself, a gyroscopic direction center, a traveling norm. Other cultures begin with a fixed and social heart, a temple, a holy city. American life begins when that enclosure is escaped. One becomes American by going out. We are a people of departures, not arrivals. To reach one place is merely to catch sight of a new beyond. Our basic myth is that of the frontier. Our hero is the frontiersman. To become urban is to break the spirit of man. Freedom is out on the plains under endless sky. A pent-in American ceases to be American. Or, as Emerson put it, the land is the appointed remedy for whatever is false and fantastic in our culture. A really human life is impossible in our cities, said Henry Lloyd Demarest. The city in the American imagination has played roughly the role of hell in Christian theology. Keep that in mind. There is no more defining note in our history than the total absence of a sacred city on our shores, on our soil. We never had a central cultic place, says Gary Wills. America's religious art runs from the Hudson River painters through Ansel Adams' treatment of Yosemite to John Ford's celebration of Monument Valley. The great urge of the American imagination is to light out for the territory. Yada, 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 okay, why don't you beat it to death, huh? Chicago became the archetypal city of American literature because it is the midway place, the quick-growth metropolis, the truly native product. Cities on the East Coast still had some European airs, but Chicago was our very own, a place of risks identified with catastrophes. The Chicago fire, Haymarket bombing, Pullman strike, Stockyard stench, Capone mob, Daily machine, yada, 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 okay. So California's American, and we suck, because we still mooch around these effete Brits with horsey teeth who smoke pipes with that awful rum and maple mixture and who live in daub and wattle huts and anyway. And of course, you know, the Californians, can't trust them. I mean, half of them are Mexicans, and not that Mexicans are untrustworthy, but are they really Americans or are they Mexicans? I ask you. As Lizzie Borden was wont to quip, much of the more hopeful literature of the city is the tale of creative enclaves in a hostile environment. But the push is outward if they succeed. Now, talk about your creative enclaves in a hostile environment, and inevitably the discussion must turn to Central Square. And let me say just a word about Central Square. Because of greedy landlords lobbying for legislation that was none of their concern in the first place, but just to establish solidarity with their embattled brothers in Boston and Cambridge, the entire state voted to get rid of rent control, thus destroying Central Square as a cultural enclave of the type recently discussed by the wrong hero in his program, Shadow Heritage Spokesman. And so, to punish you for voting for this ridiculous measure, even if you didn't, or to punish you for not fighting harder to get rid of this, to retain rent control, I am going to no longer show you these pictures, and you're going to have to actually gaze upon my limpid and yet somehow strangely fascinatingly grotesque face as your punishment for refusing to work harder. So, now the wrong hero will speak. Good evening. I am the wrong hero. I am your heritage spokesman, your shadow heritage spokesman. Let us talk a little more about the shadow heritage of the United States. And I can drop the pretense of trying to disguise my voice, because even though I am in the shadow, I am not necessarily of the shadow. Make of that what you will. This is awfully dark. I mean, I have the iris open all the way. This doesn't seem to be doing much. You know why? Because this picture tube, it's kind of on its last legs, which is why I use it sparingly. Also, it's not a particularly sunny day out. I mean, it looks like rain. Actually, it looks like it's going to rain. Let us not be illiterate, because after all, I am our heritage, shadow heritage spokesman. Now, of course, this is chapter 14 of our long-running series on the 1996 American political presidential elections and their aftermath. However, that leaves room for a great deal of digression in the interim. Don't you enjoy listening to a comedian who is so erudite that he uses words like interim and digression as part of his everyday conversation? Yes, amid all the buffoonery and slapstick and such, there is room for a few of the finer things in life, the finer ideas, well, like Shakespeare and such, all that balderdash. I have an appreciation for such things. Let us not throw out the baby with the bathwater, but if you see a rat, then by gum, you gotta hit it. I'm starting to lose it. So, small towns in Western movies are often enthralled to gambling interests, or huge ranching interests, or railroad interests. Well, yeah, just like Cambridge, Massachusetts, enthralled to the housing interests. I'm still bitter. Well, not only am I bitter, but I have reason to be. Now, as you know, the free lunch, the gravy train, ended in December of 1994 for us non-Section 8 housing individuals, when the Rent Control Board basically said, "Sorry, sap. Looks like you're out of luck, Joe sucker." That was, of course, the day I moved out. Although I did not remove myself from the premises of the apartment at which I was living altogether until roughly March of 1995. Now, and I still continued to crash there right up to June of 1997. Amazing, phenomenal, quite a run. So, no, wait a minute, let me think. Yeah, they got rid of rent control in 94. How do you like that? It's been almost 3 years. And the rent has gone up and up and up. Now, when I moved into 494 Massachusetts Avenue, I'm not going to tell you which apartment, but it's the first one. The rent was, let's see, $160 a month. There were 4 of us living there. Do you know what that means? $40 a month, $10 a week rent, $10 a week. I could find $10 just picking up soda cans if I wanted to. Although, of course, that's ridiculous because I wouldn't do such a thing. But I could work for 1 day a week and pay the rent. Of course, what I would eat and purchase alcoholic beverages with would have been quite another matter. But you could live practically for nothing. $40 a month I was paying. $40 a month in 1979. Weren't those the days? Of course, soon enough the rent went up to $225, and I'm not going to bore you with the increasing increments and their years. However, let it suffice to say that by the end of the 80s, the rent was up to about $400 a month, which is about a 3-fold increase in 10 years. Which, that's kind of phony if you ask me. Well, it was a 250% increase in about 10 years, which is like a 25% increase a year. That doesn't seem right somehow. I always thought the increase was lower than that. By law, they weren't really allowed to increase it that much. Well, in any event, no, actually, the rent didn't really start going up precipitously until they got rid of rent control. In short order, the rent went from $495 to $600, okay, that's reasonable, to $800, well, that's not quite so reasonable. And finally, the straw that broke the camel's back, as of July 1st, 1997, the rent for that four-room apartment, which, mind you, in 1979 cost $160, was $1,200. Now, figure it out for yourself. In the course of 18 years, the rent went up from $160 to $1,200. Now, doing a little simple math, albeit in your head. Okay, here's how you do this math, right? 160 minus 1200, versus 1200, which is 16 to 120, which is 8 to 60, which is 4 to 30, which is 2 to 15. So it went up from a factor of, it went up by a factor of 750%, right, in the course of 18 years. Which, if you divide 18 into 750, that's about 9% a year. Is that right? I mean, yeah, it went up. 18 into 750 is, let's say 20 into 750 would be 2 into 7. No, it went up 37% a year or so. 35% a year. That's ridiculous. The rate of inflation is 2%, and the rent goes up 35% a year? Ah! I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy talk. Of course, the actual rate of increase was much lower, except, you're sort of amortizing it over 18 years, right, when you're doing that. I want to figure this out for once and for all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 16, 24, 32. Yeah, it's about 40% a year went up. Of course, that last jump from 800 to 1200, where in the course of, about a year, the rent goes up 50%. 50% in 1 year. Can you imagine that? So, if you had 3 people living there, which by rights is the sustainable number of people for that apartment, which only has 3 bedrooms and a closet-sized auxiliary room, which was used for God knows what, then basically you went from paying $40 a month, $10 a week, to paying $400 a month, $40 a week, $100 a week. I mean, yeah, and you can make $100 these days. You could probably make it in 1 day. If you made $10 an hour, worked a 12-hour day after taxes, yeah, I mean, you could do it. You could swing it. $400 isn't that onerous for, each tenant to pay. But I'm only paying $200 down in Providence, and this is a much nicer place. I mean, I'm sharing it with someone else, obviously, but so it's a matter of go 52 miles south and pay 1/3 the rent that you're paying in Cambridge, Massachusetts, for the privilege of having a Cambridge parking sticker and a Cambridge address. No, thank you. 18 years is long enough. Of course, I can still break into that place, but I don't want to. They haven't changed the locks yet, as far as I know. I can still get up to the roof, which is all I really care about. I'll just sleep on the roof. I'd better never see a book than to be warped by its attraction clean out of my own orbit and made a satellite instead of a system, said Emerson in The American Scholar. Not sounding particularly scholarly there, Mr. E. John Wayne is the avatar of the hero in that genre that best combines all these mythic ideas about American exceptionalism. Contact with nature, distrust of government, dignity achieved by performance, skepticism towards the claims of experts. Experts like those who got rid of rent control in Cambridge. Hi, I'm the wrong hero, your shadow heritage spokesman. And I've got a bone to pick with those smart aleck, double-domed, think tank cretins who can't even park their bicycles straight and rah, rah, rah. I don't mind admitting I'm upset. I'm mad, even. How can anybody afford to live anymore with rents like that? I mean, yeah, maybe they were way too cheap in the 80s, which of course was just the time. I mean, if you had invested $1,000 in the stock market, even if you had just gone with the Standard and Poor industrial, I mean, you'd be worth thousands of dollars now. You'd have like $60,000 in your kitty. Not a bad return over the course of 15 years. So, I mean, but instead, cheap rent and not working. Of course, well, I mean, it could have like worked like a dog, right? But I mean, you can't really do your best work when you're living in a slum. So it was either live in a slum, take life easy, enjoy yourself. Of course, there wasn't much to do in Cambridge back in 1982. To tell you the truth, I mean, there was the club up on Main Street, which later became Night Stage, and God knows what it is now. And there was the Inn Square Men's Bar up in Inman Square, which is a good, healthy walk of about 20 minutes or so. And that was it. No Club 3, no Club Bohemia, no Middle East, no TTs, nothing. There was the Rat over in Boston. There was Cantones, also over in Boston. And that was about it. I mean, there were these loft parties in the South End. There was Storyville in Kenmore Square, but that didn't last long. There were always little fly-by-night clubs. There was the Underground, but I think by 1982 it was gone. And besides, it was just the laundromat basement of some Boston University dorm. It wasn't that much of a venue. Although it was great fun to see Billy Ruade rolling around on the floor and hearing the band. I think in that case it was ISIS commenting, "Yeah, he's the man who comes and cleans our floor." But anyway, 1982 was a long time ago, and you kids today don't realize how good you have it. Why, if we had places like that back in 1982 with the rents the way they were, we'd spend 5 nights a week out in the nightclubs. Yeah, and things change. I mean, this camera, I bought it for about $600-800 back in 1991. I can get the same camera. I can get a much better camera for $500. All of you, I plead with you. You might be living the way I used to live 15 years ago. For God's sake, go out and get yourself a video camera. You can afford it, even if you can't. For Christ's sake, I mean, just put a little money away every week. Prevail upon a friend of yours who has a credit card to get it for you on credit and pay it off. Or go to the damn store and get credit. I don't know if I'd advise going to Circuit City or Leechmere, though. That's the problem. I don't know where else you would get a bargain like that. Well, let's see. I was at an Inn and Hope, and I saw a camera just like this, but with better specifications. The only thing it doesn't have is this feature. You're not likely to find this feature. Hi. Now I truly am your Shadow Heritage spokesman. Pretty eerie stuff, huh? Oh, I better not do this too long or I'll scare the kiddies. But I do want you to know, I'm coming to eat you up. There. Don't worry, I'm back. Anyway, you can have so much fun with these cameras. I mean, you can do what I'm doing, basically. Just have a nice little sit-down and chat with the audience and bore them half to death with your inexplicable outbursts of irrational rage and such. And but, if you keep a notebook, I mean, you'll have something interesting to talk about, right? This is ridiculous. I'm only 4 pages into this notebook, which I was hoping to get halfway through, and it's 268 pages long, and there's no way, Jose. I gotta go down to URI pretty soon, so I'm gonna probably wrap up this portion of the discussion and then head out of the house, and then eventually I will return unto you. The Western has the ability to put so much of the American myth into such visual immediacy. It makes the West what Jean-Luc Godard calls the most cinematographic genre in the cinema. Westerns, like sci-fi or horror movies, push a fixed moral system out into alien space where its assumptions no longer apply. But the Western does better in a realistic setting, making the challenge more intimate to us. The Western can deal with the largest themes in American history, beginning with the original sin of our country, the seizing of land from its original owners. It deals with the waves of emigration west, trappers, miners, herders, ranchers, farmers. It tracks the racing, overlapping new technologies, the stagecoach, the Conestoga wagon, the telegraph, the cavalry, the railroads, barbed wire, successively improved firearms, new breeds of horse. It explores the relations of people with the land, of the individual with the community, of vigilante law to settled courts. It is entirely a story of change, since the disappearance of the frontier is the necessary corollary of pushing the frontier on. These themes may be exhausted in our culture, but the problems native to the form have certainly not disappeared. We may have no literal frontier left, but neither do we have a cult city. Our meaning lies still in motion, in the independent individual, the need for space as an arena of freedom. That's nice, sounds very nice, very poetic, but what the hell does it mean? Does it mean that the West functions as our equivalent of an American cult city? Are they trying to say that the West is the American Rome, the U.S. Mecca, the secular Jerusalem of the American religion? Well, what about Washington, D.C., huh? It's really more like the anti-city, the anti-cult city. It's like evil Washington. It's like good farms, good farmers, good stupid drooling hicks, good cretinous moronic hillbillies, but bad Washington, bad. No, I don't buy it. No, not for 1 minute. All right, a quick rundown then. Candidates for the American cult city, and I have my own candidate in mind, but we'll discuss that. Boston, the American cult city? I don't think so. Too deracinated, too uppity, snooty, highfalutin. So, no, not Washington. Miami Beach? No, too colorful. New Orleans? Ditto. Los Angeles isn't a city. It's 78 suburbs in search of a city, as we all know. San Francisco, ding ding, trolley cars, rice roti, homosexual parades on Halloween. No, sorry. I mean, I have nothing against any of those things, but it's just not what the flyover boys in the regions between the East and West Coast consider to be America. So that leaves out basically most of the coastal cities right there. New York City? No, New York City isn't even a part of the United States, really, strictly speaking. So, we've eliminated the East Coast, the West Coast, the Gulf Coast. What does that leave? Austin, Texas? Well, the popular animated television cartoon series, King of the Hill, is basically set in Austin, Texas. But, no, the accents are just a little too exotic. Don't think so. Although, close. We're edging a little closer now. Obviously you can't pick a town that's too obscure, something that only the inhabitants would think was the American cult city and no one else. Cincinnati? See, that's what I mean. It's just a little too obscure. Cleveland? That's a joke. What's that place in Iowa? What's the capital of Iowa, where the American primaries sort of revolve around every 4 years? Well, whatever. No, 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 not quite. Manchester, New Hampshire. I mean, it's the biggest city in New Hampshire. No, no, that's the East Coast. Can't go with that. Let's see now. Where else is there? Chicago? Chicago, Chicago, that's Harlan town. The market is up and Wall Street is down. Oh, that's actually New York. Well, Chicago has a substantial black ghetto to recommend it for the status of American cult city. Chicago's a pretty good. And then there's Steubenville, Ohio, home of Dean Martin, and known as Boys Town or Little Chicago. And I know this because I just read the biography of Dean Martin called Dino, Living High in the Dirty City of Dreams by, I think it was Goralnik. And so I know these things. But no, not Steubenville, or Stewville as they call it. But we're edging closer to the American cult city. Pittsburgh, that's what the American cult city is. Pittsburgh. You know, I sound like Daffy Duck here. It's Pittsburgh. Yeah, because it was the first city to feel all of the ill effects and ravages of the very type of industrialization which so changed Victorian England. Victorian England. From 1834 to, well, you know, the Edwardian era sort of leaches into it as well. You know, England was at the top of their game from 1834 to roughly 1914. You know, they controlled 1/4 of the world. Their industries were the envy of the civilized world, and quite rightly, they considered themselves the center of the world, the greatest empire the world had ever known, etc., etc., etc. And of course, being their colonial outpost, which later declared its independence. See, secretly, I think they're proud of us that we declared our independence and became greater than them. We're basically their overachieving children there, even though we are a polyglot. It is the nature of a colonial outpost to accept immigration, right? The home country doesn't accept the immigrants. That's left for the colonial outpost to do. Like, for example, Australia. Anyway, England was at the top of their game, and during the time at which England was at the top of their game, its recently liberated Scotch-Irish colonial outpost, the United States, and more specifically, Pittsburgh, the first fruits of the post-revolution American westward expansion, was like all industrialism, no culture. I mean, around the, about the time of the 1830s, I mean, there was a certain amount of culture, but Pittsburgh was still a very small and sleepy town, but soon it became the forge of the world. Now, there's something interesting. Pittsburgh was once known as the Birmingham of America because Birmingham, England, played the corresponding role as steelmaking center for the British Empire. And then the town of Birmingham, Alabama became known as the Pittsburgh of the South. So go figure. And of course there are two Pittsburghs. One of them is in Kansas, but is spelled without the H. But did you know that for a 10-year period, circa roughly 1898 to 1908, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania was also spelled without the H? True fact. Now, speaking of colonial outposts, according to Andrew McGahan, who is citing Bruno Maddox in the New York Times Book Review of February 23rd, 1997, Australia is probably the worst place in the world to write the harrowing anti-novel that exposes your generation as a phalanx of debauched zombies. Where's the nihilism? Where's the gritty banality? Living in Australia, you have no steady Caledonian drizzle to drive you to drugs, No skyrocketing divorce rate to make you veer your mother's Lexus off a cliff. Merely a kaleidoscopic scenery and sheltering raft of laid-back, optimistic adults, beerily inclined to support you in your every move. How do you even start to invent a fractured, empty soul for your generation when there are kangaroos and duck-billed platypi boinging past your window? Well, anyhow, what I find fascinating, that may not fascinate you, I mean, that's understood. That's understood, see? But, see, that's what Jimmy Stewart would say. That's understood, see? But, I've been fascinated by Long John Silver's parrot. Maybe I give you no stories, tales, or hearsay, but only tales to which I was eyewitness. Sure, I mean parrot, Captain Flint. The bird has been at Madagascar, and Malabar, and Suriname, and New Providence, and Portobello. She was at the fishing up of the wrecked plate ships. It's there she learned the phrase, pieces of eight. And little wonder, 350,000 of them, Hawkins. When we fight under the Jolly Roger, we give quarter. When we do not give quarter when we fight under the red or the bloody flag. Sure, hire, maybe that's the way we do it. We're pirates. And finally, tying all this together, and in Pittsburgh, the baseball team is known as the Pittsburgh Pirates, also familiarly known as the Buccaneers. Now, why should that be, you say to yourself? What do pirates have to do with Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh, well, I mean, it's not landlocked. I mean, it's on the, it's at the confluence of the Allegheny and the Monongahela rivers, which form the Ohio River, which eventually flows westward and south and meets up with the Mississippi River, into which it empties and finally all the way to New Orleans. So, far from being a landlocked town, in theory you could go from New Orleans to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania without ever once touching dry land. Alright? Just so you know that. And thence, perhaps, even as far as Philadelphia, if you were to refill the ill-fated canal system that was begun to cross Pennsylvania, in emulation, of course, of the Erie Canal, which crossed New York from Albany to Buffalo, before superseded entirely a mere 10 years later by the railroads. But what I'm getting at is, why the Buccaneers? Because of the robber barons. See, Pittsburgh was the exemplar of industrialism and industrialization, not only because of the actual physical presence of the machinery, not only because of the favorable geographic location which put it on a river which flowed all the way to New Orleans, not only because of the natural resources which included the coal regions, the bituminous and the anthracite coal, whichever one. Actually, bituminous is soft, and I think it's in the western half of the state, and anthracite is hard coal, and it's in the eastern half. And of course, bituminous coal is soft and therefore dirty, and therefore cast a pall over everything when burned, and that's why Pittsburgh was such a sooty, smoky city for so many years, because of all that coal that was being burned in making steel. And it was the Mesabi Iron Ranges in Minnesota or Michigan or whatever, right around where Bob Dylan was born, actually. And you could take a train, and by train you could ship this iron ore to Pittsburgh, and there was the coal right there and plentiful water, and then there was steel and stuff. But also, because it was a big center of industrialization, it attracted many of the great robber barons of the 1880s and 1890s, as exquisitely documented in Matthew Josephson's book, the robber barons, and also, of course, in the subsequent volumes, the politicos and the president makers, which basically cover the post-Civil War range all the way up to 1914. But the robber barons covers the era roughly from 1865 to 1890. Andrew Carnegie, Frick, Mellon, all the people for whom all of the town's banks, colleges, and libraries are named, were basically the robber barons, hence the Pittsburgh Pirates. Robber barons, pirates, corsairs, buccaneers. Get it? So, now you know. And now I must go because I'm running late. And I must go to my appointment and meet my appointed destiny. But I will be back. I'll be back. And when I am, you will know it. Whatever the hell that means. And so, my friends, now the time is near. I must meet with the final curtain. Noble friend, man's best friend, noble beast. The kind of animal you don't mind having around because she is the essence, the quintessence of nobility. Kind, gentle animal. Why, she would lick your hand as you raised it against her, even in the very act. And she understands nonverbal cues, too. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging about this dog. I mean, that's the sort of thing that the doting owners would undoubtedly do in any circumstance. However, I must say, this is an extraordinary dog. A kind of a wonder dog, as a matter of fact. Not that she is given to performing any sorts of unusual tricks, but that she is, in fact, a kind dog, a good dog, the kind of dog you would take to meet your ma, the kind of dog that you would be proud to meet the mother of, were you to be given that opportunity. Yes, kind dog, gentle dog, noble dog. What more can I say? Of course, she does have a bad habit of sleeping on our beds in our absence. But why should our faithful friend not be permitted the same perquisites and comforts as her human companions, whom she serves so faithfully? And of course, she doesn't always sleep on the sofa. Sometimes she sleeps on the bed, sometimes she sleeps on the floor, sometimes she even sleeps in her own bed, occasionally, when there is no other option available. However, one has to be careful not to leave the bedroom doors open in one's absence, because she will certainly jump upon that very same bed and shed hairs and fleas and other vermin that she may or may not be in possession of at the time. And, well, you know, they say it's a dog's life, and I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean. I suppose in earlier, less enlightened times, dogs were not treated as the faithful friends and companions that they, in fact, have always served mankind as since their first domestication so many years ago. However, enough encomiums about my faithful pet Mona, who you see here in a 30-second time lapse. As you can see, she's not really generally up to very much. However, when she hears the door open and the master come in, as you will see shortly, you can see that she's actually listening for the sound of the truck. And every time she hears a vehicle, her ears prick up and she raises her head. Now, very shortly, she will in fact hear the sound of my rattle-trap vehicle pulling into the driveway. And when she does, she will spring up in great excitement and rush to the door in the expectations of being taken out for a walk. However, such as not to be. The time schedule is so strictly limited that that will not be possible. Now, should be right about now. Well, here we go. Hopefully you were enlightened by that interlude. Hi, I'm the Wrong Hero, your Shadow Heritage spokesman, which, as I mentioned before, just coincidentally happens to be the title of this presentation. And we haven't really gotten very far along, but perhaps in the remaining hour and 10 minutes that remain, that's a real redundancy, we will in fact be able to accomplish far more than hitherto. I hope you enjoyed 5 minutes of footage of alternately a dog sleeping and an empty sofa. And if you want more footage of this kind, tough luck. I'm not in business to be glorifying some animal. Anyway, let the left destroy Gingrich, and it will be 1974 all over again, says Laddie Plazinski of the American Spectator, which I might remind you I faithfully read. In fact, I put it right up there, well before reading the American Prospect, the American Enterprise, or even the World Press Review, which I have nothing but the highest of praise for the latter of. I read the American Spectator faithfully every month. Now, not cover to cover. These umpteenth articles about the scandals of the Clinton administration, such as they are or may be, tend to become tiresome after about the 15th such article in the space of approximately 6 months. So I generally read the Ben Stein's diary and other things like that. By this time next year, I suspect, Bill Clinton will be renting out the Lincoln bedroom by the hour. Also, Laddie Plazinski. What the hell kind of name is Laddie Plazinski, anyway? As governor, Clinton eagerly used a demimonde of private eyes and shady operators for political intelligence and, by some accounts, intimidation, says James Ring Adams. And once again, one has to wonder, what kind of a man would proudly declare his name to be James Ring Adams? What was he, the direct descendant of President Adams by way of the Tweed Ring? Well, that's a good question. The remorselessly ubiquitous Reverend Jackson, opines Mark Stein. That's the funny thing about diversity. It always seems to lead to homogeneity. Also, Ben Stein, he's referring to the second Clinton inaugural, at which many African-American musical stars made their appearance. Patti LaBelle shrieks and ululates and is the queen of today's melisma junkies. That's to say, she takes a perfectly good monosyllable and elongates it to 15, as if soulfulness were measured by the yard. Now, this strikes home in a rather personal way, since, and I believe it was 1983 or 82, I actually had an opportunity to interview Patti LaBelle as a quondam rock record reviewer. Now, I was well acquainted with her repertoire, but I made a rather embarrassing gaffe when I asked her why her first 2 albums had so much cover material and whether it was forced upon her by the record company Warner Brothers in order to give her commercial viability with a crossover audience. And she said, oh no, they didn't have any influence whatsoever on the selections that we performed. In fact, we were the ones who chose those songs. She was very gracious about it. It was a very stupid question. Now, I don't remember an awful lot about this particular interview other than my embarrassing gaffes, but my girlfriend, who was there at the time, it was at the channel, and it was through the influence of Billy Ruane that I got an opportunity to meet with this diva and legend. My girlfriend tells me that I had to wait for almost 2 hours to get a chance to talk with her for 15 minutes, which could very well have been the case, since of course I was an extremely low man on the totem pole. I was writing for a giveaway publication called, I believe, The Local, put out, published in Providence, Rhode Island. So in Boston, I guess I was the littlest fish of a very large pond. Now, Mark Stein also opines in the American Spectator that country music is fine if you're the sort of stump-footed, inbred mountain man who likes nothing better than a jigger of moonshine and a bunk-up with his sister. Now, that's typically British for you, the condescending tone towards the flyover country, the representation of all Southerners as illiterate, barefoot hillbillies with ragged clothing, large straw hats, jigger of moonshine ever at the present, and of course a bunk-up with one's sister, which of course is a British term rather than an American one. In any event, moving right along, according to Nicholas Lehman, social trends like crime, divorce, illegitimacy, dropout rates, and drug taking, which we identify with the 1960s, all rose most steeply during the 1970s. The reason is that cultural developments spread gradually from the few to the many. What dozens of young people were doing in Haight-Ashbury in 1967, millions of young people were doing in watered-down form in Omaha and Peoria 10 years later. Official social commentators didn't catch this because in the 1970s they were focused on the 1960s being over. Well, okay, I suppose. I'm not quite sure what journal this is cited from, actually. It says TWM of March 1997. I don't recall that there's any TWM on my reading list. I don't know, the weekly, maybe it was the Weekly Standard. In any event, he also, Lawrence J. Korb, writing in the same journal of dubious provenance, says, in the early 1970s, Richard Nixon eliminated one of the major wars from Pentagon contingency planning and slashed defense forces and spending accordingly. Ironically, Nixon used the defense dividend to double aid to state and local governments, index entitlements, and establish EPA, OSHA, and Amtrak. No wonder Mark Shields called him our last liberal president. This 1.5 war policy remained in effect until Ronald Reagan adopted a strategy of horizontal escalation, which postulated that any war with the Soviet Union would automatically be a worldwide conflict, not just confined to the European theater. This enabled Reagan to rationalize increasing defense spending by over 50% in real terms in his first 4 years in office. Susan Threadgill says that Alan K. Simpson described one of the pleasures of being out of politics. When someone walks up to you at a gathering, puts their hand over their name tag and says, "I'll bet you don't know who I am," I can say, "No, I don't give a rat's ass either." So, anyway, did you know that Alan Greenspan, the man who is being currently credited with our wonderfully burgeoning economy, was once a devotee of Ayn Rand, which practically makes him a libertarian. A libertarian, ooh, I'm scared. Mommy, it's a libertarian, I'm scared. Well, according to Mark Gertzon, who gives a rather interesting lexicon in which he defines patria as the religious state, corporatia as the business world, dysia as the disadvantaged, media as TV and radio, Gaia as the New Agers and environmentalists, and officia as government and big government advocates, also states that democracy, in addition to guaranteeing freedoms, is frequently messy, harsh, chaotic, belligerent, arrogant, and unkind. Not because of some spiraling moral decline or widening divisions in the American citizenry, but because that is the nature of democracy. And he makes an interesting point when he goes on to say, despite all the talk about new ideas and new directions, truly new ideas are antithetical to consensus builders. Any new idea or discovery that turns out to be right automatically declares dozens, maybe even hundreds of old ideas wrong. And even among consensus and community builders, there are few rights or wrongs, merely the vast gray zone of belief systems. Now this, in fact, is very true. Of course, you can go on and on about the nature of bureaucracies being such that people in the bureaucracies eventually define their number one job as perpetuating the bureaucracy, rather than attempting to find measures by which the bureaucracy may someday be rendered redundant. And you can go on and on about the nature of the system being such that reformers who somehow infiltrate the system eventually rise to such a position of power and are so altered in the process that they no longer wish to enact the kind of radical reforms that they once wished to enact when initially entering the bureaucratic zone. Edward J. Epstein, citing Michael Ibarra, says, how often image-mongering distorts the workings of the marketplace, making a success of someone who came close to destroying every business he touched. Armand Hammer's only real triumph, it seemed, was the creation of his own myth during his lifetime. He was the most devious man I ever met or could imagine, said an associate. This, of course, was in the aftermath of the death of Armand Hammer. Well, anyway, interestingly enough, Deng Xiaoping said, the authoritarian ruler of China recently deceased, not to engage in debates. That was an invention of mine, to get more things done. See, that's the myth, the fallacy of the strong leader being able to work his will on the populace in such a way as to get things done. And a lot of people fall for this. What we need in the White House is a strong man, somebody that won't take no guff, somebody who has the will to power, and we haven't had such a strong man in quite some time. The last such person we had of that description was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The problem is, in a democracy, once the strong leader departs, what is left in his absence is a chaos which eventually undoes the reforms that he enacted. Look no further than the eventual dismantling of the New Deal under the successive administrations of, yes, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and Bill Clinton. So, anyway, moving right along, as de Tocqueville says, that's right, whenever you're at a loss for something to say, just quote de Tocqueville, or de Tocqueville, or however you say his name. The more alike people become, the more sensitively they react to differences. Keep that in mind. And I guess the corollary and opposite viewpoint is also the case. The less alike people are, the less selectively they react to differences. Well, that doesn't seem to be necessarily true. And you can always test the veracity of a maxim by attempting to define it in terms of its opposite. If A is not equal to B, then B should not be equal to A as well. But that's for you to decide. Well, as Al Sharpton said to Mayor Giuliani, this administration is like the Rocky Mountains. The higher up you get, the whiter it gets. Well, that would seem to bear out de Tocqueville's maxim. Everybody shakes the money tree when urging campaign reform, while urging campaign reform. Well, that would seem to be a pretty dead issue. Well, you know, everybody in politics has to have one assistant who, in the words of Al Kamen, is the guy who handles the radioactive material, the guy in the lead suit. Of course, we have seldom had a president who, in fact, was that individual who is the guy who handles the radioactive material, the guy in the lead suit. Usually that's left for the vice president to do. So it's interesting that Clinton's recent concern about global warming should, in fact, be kind of a switcheroo, because that's Al Gore's turf. Now, do you suppose Clinton's sudden concern with the environment is his means of giving Al Gore a leg up in the year 2000? Maybe that's something that Clinton could do in the year 2000. The Constitution does not specifically prohibit Bill Clinton from serving as vice president under Al Gore in the year 2000. It only says in the, I think the 26th Amendment, that the president shall serve 2 terms and no more than half of a 3rd term. So, in theory, there's no reason in the world why Bill couldn't be vice president, and it would be, of course, that would create an issue if anything ever happened to Al Gore. Bill Clinton then could become president for another 2 years. If there were less than 2 years of Al Gore's disrupted term remaining. Or Bill Clinton could resign right now, let Al Gore be president for a while, and run for another term in the year 2000, although whether he would win, and whether he would put himself through that, and whether such an unprecedented step would be considered insane by the punditocracy is, of course, a point to be considered. Well, let's see. Ray Flynn, the departing Vatican ambassador, hung on to that post, and this was demonstrated by, cited by Al Kamen, by dragging his fingers across the white tablecloth. What is to become of Ray Flynn? Does anybody even talk about Ray Flynn anymore? I mean, the Vatican ambassadorship, that's a real one-way ticket to Palookaville now, isn't it? Well, according to Newsweek, who of course was all on Twitter over the appointment of Madeleine Albright to the Secretary of State, when Madeleine Albright stayed at Moscow's Radisson Hotel last week, and this would have been February 28th or thereabouts, local American businessmen winced. "It's like staying at the flagship hotel of Murder Incorporated," said one. Of course, the newsletter Counterpunch has a great many unkind things to say about Madeleine Albright. Senior Government Operations Chief Fred Thompson, campaign finances abuses investigator, GOP 2000 hopeful. As an aide said, "We're too squishy for one group and too stiff for the other. We're just going to keep our eye on the ball." And what does that eye on the ball end up becoming? Oh yeah, Vince Foster did commit suicide. Now we spent how much money to figure that out? Something we knew anyway? Access Gate keeps getting slimier, according to the Conventional Wisdom Watch in Newsweek of March 3rd, 1996. But we don't hear an awful lot about Access Gate anymore now, do we? Well, times change. Bill Clinton is an awful lot like Deng Xiaoping. The little bottle was his nickname because he bobbed right back up under purges, after purges, and of course he was also only 4'11". Can you imagine a president of the United States being a Robert Reich-sized, pint-sized chief executive? I guess he'd have to stand on risers or something. or he'd make all of his aides shave several inches off of their heels, as Jerry Lewis did while performing with Dean Martin, to give the illusion of their being shorter than they actually are, so as not to make the chief executive look like a runt. Won't be long before we have President Yoda. They are almost universally the productions of the most ill-tempered and rascally part of the country, often evidently written from tavern scenes of drunkenness. Thomas Jefferson to James Madison on the poison pen letters which were being published in the American press during his administration. Yes, criticism of our chief executive is a long and honorable tradition that goes all the way back to George Washington. Now, John Adams attempted to do something about it by passing the later discovered to be unconstitutional Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. So freedom of the press is really only about 200 years old, because the Alien and Sedition Act wasn't really rescinded until many, many years later, although it was a dead letter by the time Jefferson entered office. Almost every other American statesman might be described in a parenthesis, Henry Adams wrote in his Great History. A few broad strokes of the brush would paint the portraits of all the early presidents, with this exception. But Jefferson only could be painted touch by touch with a fine pencil, and the perfection of the likeness depended upon the shifting and uncertain flicker of its semi-transcendent shadows. Jefferson's elusiveness, his outright deviousness, was a great political strength. As Ellis shows, it allowed different constituencies to see in him what they wanted to see, and this allowed him to lead while appearing to be a follower. Now, you couldn't jolly well say that about Bill Clinton, although he does appear to lead while in fact being a follower, since, of course, he focus groups everything to death, virtually every major decision he makes. And I'm sure this whole global warming brouhaha arose out of the results of such a focus group inquiry, if not several. Because, you know, the boomers are getting older, they're aging out, they have children of their own, some of them are even grown children, and of course they're concerned about the future that they leave behind for their children, being the kind of Lucy in the sky, navel-gazing, hippy-dippy, Haight-Asbury following, long-haired, radical types of their youth that later aged out and mellowed into the type of New Age followers who believe that the earth is in imminent peril from great corporations, and in fact they're not so far wrong at that. When the insurance agencies start getting really concerned about global warming, as they have already, as evinced by their refusal to provide flood coverage for many coastal plains, then you really got to start thinking, well, maybe there is something to this whole global warming schmear. And in fact, that's the case. There is something to global warming. I haven't really been in researching this to the extent to which I perhaps would have preferred, because I have other things on my plate, see, and global warming ain't one of them. But, yes, global warming is going to be a big issue in the 2000 election. Of course, under Bush, there was the Conference on Global Warming, the Rio Summit. I believe it was 1991 or 1990. Not an awful lot was decided. Yeah, it was 1990. I think it was the summer of 90, just before the whole Gulf War thing started heating up, because of a blundering Secretary of State or Undersecretary of State who permitted Saddam to think that he could walk over Kuwait with impunity. Maybe that was all part of a conspiracy. Yeah, go ahead, knock this stick off my shoulder. We won't do nothing. Now we have a nice little tidy war. The Gulf War was kind of an anomaly. I mean, it didn't really leave much of a scar on the American psyche. It was a neat and quick war. It was sort of like the Spanish-American War, actually. It was over practically before we knew it. Not that that's a bad thing. The general spread of the light Mm. The mass of mankind has not been born with spurs on their back, nor a favored few, booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately by the grace of God. So, old Tom Jefferson, 10 days before he died, was trying to make perhaps the classic populist statement. Can you explain to me how that will be setting a moral example if I made the Democrats even more vulnerable than they are now? Wondered Bill Clinton. Well, as Justice Brandeis said, sunshine is the best disinfectant. Bill Clinton, take note. Why do you suppose Bob Dole used to spend all his time sitting out on his porch and soaking in the rays? If you're 5 years too early, that's being wrong, says Louis Rookheiser in Wall Street Week. So I don't know, is it 5 years too early for the global warming thing? I don't think so. I think it's about 5 or 10 years too late. If not, in fact, 20 years too late. They knew about this whole ozone thing 20 years ago. They knew about it in 1975. It sure has taken them a long time to finally gear up to the realities of it. Well, as Walt Whitman said, the grand deaths of the race, the dramatic deaths of every nationality, are its most important inheritance value, in some respects beyond its literature and art. Is not here indeed the point underlying all tragedy? Well, anyway, I'm getting hungry. But I can't break for lunch yet. In fact, I'm running on such a draconian schedule that I'm going to run 5 minutes over my schedule, and I have to take the rug outside and beat it, and I got to take a shower, grab something for lunch, take the dog home. I just don't have enough time to do all this. How am I going to do this? I'm going to have to put some music on for the last 5 minutes, I suppose. I don't know. Some nice music would be very good at this point, wouldn't it? But you ain't going to get it, see? Politicians, according to Ralph Steadman, quoted in the New Statesman of 14 February, politicians rendered their unspeakable antics a cozy entertainment in every living room throughout the land. I don't want buffoons to wield such power. Their authority is a mask of violence. They have disrupted communities, created new ones in limbo, caused unemployment by transforming economics into a weapon against the human workforce, discouraged and dismembered our welfare systems and our culture, and learned to lie with eloquent ease. It is now respectable to cheat and win. Personal gain at any price is progress, and a job for life is as desperate as a backstreet abortion. There's pornography in the madhouse, madness in the food chain, stupidity in the heart of government, intolerance in the streets, greed in our water supply, and childhood is a dangerous option. Pretty eloquent, Mr. Steadman, particularly keeping in mind that you are actually a political cartoonist. Well, as Cyril Connolly put it, the civilization of one epoch becomes the manure of the next. Cyril Connolly was quite a guy. One of the best essayists of the 20th century, according to some, or at least according to the New Statesman, for whom he wrote many book reviews. Well, as Nebraska State Senator Jim Jensen said, what people really need is to learn what people really need to learn how to do is to keep their nose out of other people's crotches. Well, that's a pretty crotchety thing to say. That was cited in the Advocate of March 4th. John J. Pitney Jr. opines, like a grocery store with empty shelves, a party without a full slate will come across as a fly-by-night operation. Browsers prefer to see a few familiar brands. If they look in the cooler and find only Mechanicville Cola instead of Coke or Pepsi, they will probably walk out without buying anything. In the same vein, the absence of well-known names on a minor party slate may cause voters to wonder whether the party is a bunch of wackos. Well, ain't that the truth? We have endowed drugs with a mysterious power to enslave that is overrated. Getting back to the whole drug war thing, I hope to do an entire show about the drug war sometime or other. Of course, you know I have been scattering commentary of this kind throughout my presentations. Well, here's something that Rabbi Eric Yaffe said, which we might do well to keep in mind. God has no special relationship with any country. God has a special relationship with people who live in a godly way. Now here's something interesting, according to Paul Rudnick. We will never have a Jewish president for the following reasons. Because he'd keep raising his hand at the UN, whining, I know, I know. Because every time another nation threatened America, he'd say, it's because I'm Jewish, isn't it? Because he couldn't sign any legislation until an hour after eating. Because his father would hoard the pens. Because the State of the Union address could not be accompanied by a snare drum. Because there's no security in it. Because well-meaning relatives would try to give him checks at the inaugural. Because the girl never gets Air Force One really clean. And there will never be a Jewish woman as president because the summer White House cannot be in Aruba. Because ordering sanctions against Bosnia can be very drying. Because there aren't enough Secret Service agents for the hand luggage. Because she needs time for Marcy, to let Marcy be Marcy. Because it's still not a husband. Because she'd try to fix up Justice Souter. Well, there does exist and has existed for a generation an international Anglophile network which operates to some extent the way the radical right believe the communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the roundtable groups, have no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other group, and frequently does so. I know of the operation of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of its instruments. My chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. Now, this is from a professor who Newt Gingrich studied under. Bill Clinton, being a protege, knew who the powerful people in the country were. Clinton belongs to the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, and the Renaissance Society, and he was a Rhodes Scholar. Clinton had big money behind him. Is this the end of nationhood and the beginning of world government? This is from Phyllis Schlafly. Not exactly the most reliable source. This was cited in George magazine of December 1996. Some more data from George magazine. Doc Switzer hired a campaign county coordinator under investigation for murder. Doc Switzer was or is, a political consultant. Dan Schnurr. Political consultants are supposed to win campaigns, not have morals. Doc Schweitzer. We're certainly more moral than the legal profession. Mike Murphy. Morris or Stone wouldn't last an hour in the music business. Carter Askew. Political consultants are certainly more moral than used car salesmen, pro athletes, and most local police. Hillary Rodham Clinton invited Billy Graham to lunch. I don't eat lunch alone with beautiful women, he told her, and met her at a restaurant. Oh, that flatterer. Oh, sure, and listen to that blarney he's been spouting. Well, here's an interesting survey concerning liberal beliefs versus conservative beliefs. 45% of liberals, but 70% of conservatives believe the world was created in 7 days. 58% of liberals, but only 30% of conservatives believe in evolution. 67% of liberals, 79% of conservatives believe in life after death. 76% of liberals, but 92% of conservatives believe in heaven, whereas 69% of liberals, but 83% of conservatives believe in hell. 72% of liberals and 82% of conservatives believe in angels. 76% of liberals and 87% of conservatives believe in miracles. 40% of liberals, but only 30% of conservatives believe in reincarnation. 44% of liberals and 41% of conservatives believe in ghosts. And 29% of liberals, 27% of conservatives believe in astrology. Now, where do I stand on this axis? I don't believe in 7-day creation. I believe in evolution. I don't believe in life after death, heaven, hell, angels, miracles, reincarnation, ghosts, or astrology. I don't know what that makes me exactly. The ultimate skeptic? Perhaps. I'm not even so sure about evolution, actually. Well, Colin Powell, his book Between Hope and Harmony is being sold at $1.50 as a fire log because it's cheaper than good kindling. That's interesting. It's how quickly these things go out of fashion. Republicans raised $549 million, and Democrats raised $332 million in 1996, according to George Stephanopoulos. So, who exactly is buying the election? I guess both parties have a hand in that. Now, if the Republicans had spent $1 less, maybe Congress would be in control of the Democrats. Who knows? The first thing you learn when you join a Democratic national presidential campaign, you're not going to have the money, so you better have the message. In 1996, we knew it would take both. Again, George Stephanopoulos. I'll tell you what we're selling. The returned phone call, says Frank Mankiewicz. That's quite a name he has. Frank Mankiewicz here. It's Frank the Mank on the job. Well, so far we've plowed through about, 60 pages or so. Not bad. Generally I do 70. Maybe I'll do as many as 135, although I doubt it. I learned to watch people's body language. Look in their eyes to see whether you are hearing whether what you were hearing was what they were really saying. Well, that's a good advice. That's a good advice. Next time you're up on stage, take a look in their eyes. Make sure that what you're saying is what they're hearing, and vice versa. Bill Clinton is master of the air. Trent Lott is master of the ground. According to Trent Lott, of course. You can't usually get 100% of what you want in politics. But if you can get 80% or most of what you want, that's worth doing. Well, if you get rid of 20% of Newt Gingrich, as Trent Lott recently attempted to do, and then backed out at the last second. Oh no, that was Dick Armey who backed out. Trent Lott's in the doghouse now. Although Newt Gingrich is weakened, perhaps, although this cannot be measured qualitatively, as much as 20%, so maybe he has a point there. Well, when I look back on all the people I went to college with and what they're doing now, it's a shanda and a chapa, a pity and a shame, a scandal actually. I haven't really brushed up on my Yiddish. May I digress for a moment? I just got a book that I've been looking for, I don't know, maybe about 10 years or so. I was going out with a nice Jewish girl for a while. She was surprised to learn that I actually knew a few Yiddish phrases. I was not aware, however, of shmata, and she was not very pleased when I referred to her dress as a shmata, not fully knowing what exactly that was. As it turns out, a shmata is a rag. Doesn't seem to be in here, though. Might be in Volume 2, which I've been looking for. I got Volume 2 of The Joys of Yiddish before I got Volume 1. Maybe it's spelled S-H-M. Or maybe it's not really Yiddish. Oh, what's this? Shagets. A Gentile boy or a young man. As opposed, I guess, to a shishka. A shiksa. Plural, shkotzin. Feminine, shiksa. Yes, you can create very many embarrassing gaffes by not knowing the proper pronunciation. Here it is, shmata or shmata. Shmata, to rhyme with pata. From Polish, zhmata, a rag, piece of cloth. This you call a dress? It's a shmata. I wouldn't drive around in a shmata like that. You can wipe your feet on them. She changes her opinion to suit everybody, that shmata. What am I, tata, father, or shmata, rag? A woman of weak character, a fauner, a sycophant, a toady. Shmata. Well, I was sadder, but shmata. Let's see if shanda is in here. See, I'm kind of at a disadvantage because I'm not quite sure how to spell many of these things. Now, you might think, what is a Gentile doing learning Yiddish? Well, it just so happens that I studied German, and I am of Polish ancestry, and so it is of some interest to me. I wasn't aware until right this moment that a word like shmata is actually Polish, of Polish derivation. A shikker, a drunk. Jewish drunks are exceedingly rare, hence the phrase a shikker and a goy. See, that's the thing with Jewish people. Jews like books, not booze. I should have been born Jewish. I'm telling you. And if I offend anybody by saying this, then tough luck. Let's see. I'm not using any... See, it's almost as bad to overly praise an ethnicity or nationality or group as it is to criticize. Let's see if shanda is in here. Well, doesn't seem to be, but it could be SCH. It might be a little too obscure for Volume 1. Volume 2 has a lot of really obscure stuff. But since I can't locate it, alright, I'm pretty sure of the spelling of Chama. See if that's in here. So much to learn, so little time. Nope, it's not in here. Colossus, or Calucius. Calucius, from the Hebrew holosh, weak, used in Yiddish to mean faint. A revolting, disgusting, or loathsome thing. Calucius. Well, let's see, what does Meshuggah mean? Meshuggah. Crazy. Is there anyone who doesn't know that Meshuggah means crazy? Every man has his own Meshuggahs. Oh, Meshuggahs. See what that means. I think I can guess what it means, actually. Insanity. Madness. But Meshuggahs is more often used in a lighter vein to discuss not mental disease, but a wacky, irrational, absurd belief, a state of affairs so silly or unreal that it defies explanation, a piece of tomfoolery, an idée fixe, and it can be used both seriously or playfully, but nearly always in an amused, indulgent way. Like some guy on WBCN describing himself in advertisements as Meshuggahs. Not yet, faithful friend, but soon. God, I sure could use something to eat. I'm starving here. You'll excuse me for just a minute. Yeah. Swell. You know what I did? I just spilled orange juice all over myself in my futile attempts to resuscitate my waning, if not whining, presentation. Don Rickles did this for decades, insulting his listeners before sucking up to them. I hate you. Love me. Stern just does it on the radio. So that takes care of Mr. Howard Stern. It's funny how that movie of his sort of just vanished from the radar screen. Now it's in the video stores. I mean, what, it came out when? What? March, April, May, June, July. This is July. 5 months later, it's in the video stores. There ought to be somebody ought to keep some sort of index of how soon a movie goes into video. Well, of course, some go direct to video. Those shouldn't really count. But I hope that somebody keeps statistics of this kind, and I'm sure they do. And whether I could actually download them from a database or not is a moot point. But there ought to be some sort of little graph that you can consult. Like, the problem is you'd have to factor in movies that were made before video was a commonplace, which would be any pre-1980 movie would have to have a different standard, I suppose. For example, there was a movie with Rock Hudson in it called, had a very strange title. It's basically the same plot as Face Off, although not quite as elaborate, and of course without the benefit of John Woo directing. It was Schlesinger directed it, Um, Same guy that did that Nathaniel West novel. Geez, I can't think of anything. My blood sugar is plummeting to precipitously low levels. But anyway, that just came out on video, and it came out in like 1964 or something like that. So that's quite a gap. I'll think of the name in a minute. It's a one-word, plural um, title. Kind of misleading too. It had a strange title. Seconds is what it's called. Real power, not that poor relative. Empowerment, says Alexander Cockburn. Oh, here we go. His damning summation of Madeleine Albright. The rest of the world regards Albright as ignorant, lazy, and stupid. Not since Moynihan has anyone used the UN post more relentlessly to seek higher position. To cement her reputation as a hawk and a crusader for America's right to treat the rest of the world as its footstool, she sabotaged the United Nations Iraq food for oil deal. The casualties were dead Iraqi children, never a big lobby in Washington, D.C. Bill and Hillary Clinton, he goes on to say, have played the education issue as a way to give them the appearance of tackling infrastructural issues of profound importance while doing nothing offensive to entrenched power. A lot easier than talking about poverty, race, and class. And he says, real power, not that poor relative. Empowerment. Well, according to M. Ratcliffe, public figures must make deliberate gestures look spontaneous and involuntary body language unrevealing. Yes, that's true. Standing up on stage and holding your arms in front of you, nervously quivering, is not the best body language to convey an air of authority and assurance, to be sure. Bill Clinton. His handwriting can mean that he doesn't stick to the rules, which can mean that he's intelligent, or that he wants to camouflage things, or both. That's great. A handwriting analysis of the first president, of the president. You know, when you become president, you got to change your handwriting a little bit so that you can distinguish between documents that you sign before you ascended to that high position and documents that you signed after. Because, you know, the ones that you signed before you were president, they're not quite as valuable on the open market. So you can't tell them. You can't sell them. Well, there are no tricks. There is only enthusiasm. And my enthusiasm for this particular project is rapidly waning. Howard Stern is a raw and sometimes funny representative of the new majority party in the country. Suburban, somewhat libertarian, somewhat illiberal, pro-choice, anti-tax, resentful of affirmative action. The silent, goofy majority, Stern has called it. I am an obsessive-compulsive, anal-retentive, miserable neurotic because I was raised by a woman who ran her household with the insensitivity of Hitler, says Howard Stern. Well, isn't that nice? Hitler was my mom, says Howard Stern. Not exactly headline news, since Howard has promulgated this saying till the last syllable of recorded time. You don't know, you don't have any remote idea how hard I have to work. I can't think, I can't act, I can't do anything but go to fundraisers and shake hands. You want me to issue executive orders? I can't focus on a thing except the next fundraiser, says Dick Morris, citing Bill Clinton. Well, that's nice to know. President's too busy raising money. Well, it looks like we got a Got somebody visiting us here. Who could that possibly be at this hour? I think the beatenest thing I ever done heard. Somebody selling magazines. Which means, oops, my mask. Where is it? My God, you have seen my true face. Now you can no longer. Whew. Oh, that was close. Of course, in the few seconds that I was on screen with my actual identity, none of you will remember this. You will forget. Somebody going door to door selling magazines. That's not a very promising means by which one can make one's livelihood now, is it? Well, you know what I'm going to have to do, and I hate to do this because we were getting along so well. What I'm going to have to do is put on some pre-recorded material and go and do my errands, which include taking the dog home and preparing my lunch. And hopefully that will suffice. Because time is definitely at a premium. And it's a premium that, see, now I had all these errands I had to do this morning. If only I had gotten up half an hour earlier. That's always the way, isn't it? Can I do all this stuff in 15 minutes? Well, I won't. I think about 10 minutes of pre-recorded materials might suffice, and for the next 5 minutes at least, we can go on with this. Get to a natural closing point. Hi, I'm the wrong hero, your Shadow Heritage spokesman. And, well, this has been kind of a, I don't know, indifferent presentation, let's say. I mean, it wasn't one of my best, that's for sure. But let's talk a little bit about Len Garment, who I actually met when I used to hang around with the movers and shakers and the big wheel, big deal types who are so prevalent in New York. Len Garment, whoops, there goes the phone. Okay, that'll be a good 2 or 3 minutes worth of verbiage. Hello? Hi. Well, I spoke to somebody down at the registrar's office, and they said that they don't make any real distinction between what the course is when they rescind your tuition. They, you know, so theoretically it would benefit me to take history courses along with library courses. Yeah, because you know, they'll be paid for. So I'll be taking on an extra class. So I'll be doing 3 classes this September. I have to do 2 for the library thing. And as long as I'm getting it for free, I might as well do the history one as well. I think I can manage it. Okay. That means August is my last chance at actually getting something done with that novel. That's okay. I can take a heavy course load. Now, you know I said that reference was one of the hardest ones? Well, I'm going to take another one. It's just as hard. It's cataloging. Well, it is, but I looked at the textbooks and they come out to about $100. I can get them through interlibrary loan because I wrote the ISBN numbers down. Oh no, that's a standard. You always have to pay for the books, no matter how generous the scholarship. Well, I suppose I could I don't think they sell them at the Providence College bookstore, and the discount is kind of negligible anyway, even if they do. Well, only loosely, yeah. You can take courses through them. No, I could probably get the books on loan, or even borrow them from the cataloger at PC and photocopy the sections that I'm going to need. So, yeah. You mean a course catalog of courses that are going to be taught in the fall? That's not coming out till August. No, I'll see to it in August. And let me think. Yeah, I'm going to have to go. I have to take the dog home. You asked me to hang that rug outside, but it looks like it's going to rain. Well, I've had it out there for a little while. We're going to take it in before I... Alright. Okie dokie. Alright. Well, I love you too. I'll be home a little late tonight. I gotta run and get more gas, because I have to go to Cambridge tomorrow. So I might not be home until about 8:15 or so. Very good. Then I'll see. Oh, wait a minute. You gonna make that chicken? Alright. Okay. I mean, don't wait until I come home to eat, please. Oh. What time are you taking it? Okay, well, you... Okay. Alright, you make it for me. You can have some, too. Okay. Bye-bye. Well, isn't that cozy? Now, where was I? Len Garment, who I met, regularly received dead-of-night calls from Richard Nixon in the closing weeks of the 1968 presidential campaign. A procession of sad and lonely thoughts, mingling past and present, that needed to be expressed, not necessarily heard. Nixon's voice would gradually grow less clear, slower, indistinct, and finally end, often in mid-sentence. There would be silence, then a dial tone, at the end of a wired day on the trail. Ehrlichman said Nixon would be plagued by both exhaustion and insomnia. The antidote was seconal, a stiff drink, and a phone call to Len Garment. Isn't that nice? To be a sounding board for Richard Nixon. Nixon ultimately chose to preserve the Watergate tapes because destroying them would have been something like an act of self-mutilation, they constituted a kind of personal immortality for Nixon. That is the most astute summation of why Nixon did not destroy the tapes that I have ever heard. In any event, I suppose this is as good a time as any to wrap up for the day, and I will return to you next week with more in this ongoing series pertaining to politics as she is practiced in the United States. And now, I really hate to do this to you, but for the remaining 9 minutes, let's have some jolly commentary from a live performance by the Wrong Hero, who is, of course, your Shadow Heritage spokesman, and proud of it.
I don't know, I shouldn't have kids, because, like, I had a pretty fucked up upbringing. Shadow just replicated over and over again. What's with this clothing business? What is having kids after all, you know? Okay, so it's a little mix and match, but same deal. I hear voices. Voices telling me to kill. My dad was a hippie. He used to say stuff like, son, I'm going to teach you a lesson I'll never remember. When I was a kid, I used to think the moon followed me around. Then I realized it was following my dad around because he owed it money. He was a pretty demanding parent. Like one day I came in going, Daddy, I just got stolen. surf. Some of the most miserable, filth-encrusted, humiliating experiences have happened to me. And of course, since I'm a masochist, I dig it the most. What's going on? I hear voices from the pipe. They're like listening to the ears. It's like, gaze upon the face of the hero and die. See you later. Okay. Nice to have you. Anyway, I've been in jail a couple of times. Yeah. Want to make some of it? I'll tell you something. Nice thing about being in jail is your parents always know where you are. I like to look on the bright side of these things. Am I stupefied? Would you like some half and half? What if half and half really were half and half? You know? It's like, that would be awfully nice. I love that. Anyway, you know, I remember the first thing my dad asked. Everybody wants to get in on the act. I remember the first thing my daddy ever said. Well, he wasn't saying it to me, he was saying it to my dad. I leave him alone for 1 minute, and he's gulping baby aspirin by the fistful, and he's frying an egg. What's wrong with him frying an egg? In my shoe! What do you think? Nothing. Nothing. You have no opinion. Like, do a Jack Nicholson nugget. No, you have no opinion, do you? Well, I don't know. In my family, we didn't have Ebonics because I'm not a Negro. We had italics, which was basically the Italian version, which went something like, hey, Grandma, if a tree falls in the forest and it doesn't make a sound, I mean, if there's no one here to listen to it, does anybody hear it? And she's like, what you mean going in a forest tree falling everywhere? You get killed! Ah! Mamma mia! Mary Jolene Jolene! Italics. And it's like, what does every kid like to do when he's a kid? What does every kid want his parents to do? What is the source of recurring childhood trauma? Why is John Finney? Didn't recognize you there, motorcycle boy, in that black jacket of yours. Yeah, I thought you just got out of stir. I hear you lost your voting rights. Well, that's okay. Happens to the best of them. Hey, nice earring there, yeah. I got 5 studs in my ear. Hey, yeah, I send radio signals to Moscow on a clear night. Anyway, every kid wants to go to the circus. It's like my dad, he goes up to me and goes, hey, silly boy. Or, hey, kid. Hey, skipper. Hey, little pal. Hey, buddy. Dad, don't you remember the name of your own son? Frankie, you want to go to the circus? Yeah, I'd love to go to the circus. Evil, mustachioed ringmasters cracking whips and critters chained to stakes. Yeah, chimpanzees playing handball with their own shit. Yeah, what an educational experience. The circus, that's for me. Alcoholic clowns falling off their unicycles. Yeah, the circus. It's an education. It's a chance of a lifetime. Well, you know, growing up, we didn't really have a lot of money. We grew up in a granite quarry. We lived on quartz. I'm still shitting stalactites, okay? I mean, that's the way it was. I go to the neighbor's house. Can I borrow a cup of paste? Never mind the cup, I'll leave it here. Of course, later on it was, can I borrow a cup of heroin? Never mind the syringe, you know, I got my own. Okay? Just jam it right in there. Ah, the main line, the main line. Oh, the main, remember your name. That's your record, by the way. So, my dad was an alcoholic mechanic. He used to go to AAA meetings. And it was really a sight to behold. Where's that spanner? Think I'll have another drink. Hey there, kid, you look pretty strong. Get under there and be my Jack. The scissor Jack, Daddy? No, the other kind, the clank kind. And it's like, no, have a seat. Yes, stop the world while the interlopers come in. Now, there's a nice chair over there. Of course, if you don't mind flying spittle, rocks, bottles, eggs, and turds, you can sit there. Otherwise, you stay right where you are. Because you're nice, boys. You're nice. I can tell. With that little spit curl, you're a nice guy. You know? It's like I was talking to Charlie Manson, my old pal, the other day. Charlie, who does your ex? It's smashing. It's gear, Charlie. It's gear. Anyway, I remember my dad was always moaning about the old country. Things were better back in the old country. What do you mean, you nitwit? You came from warfare. You lived on smack and schlitz. Your idea of a big night out was to take my mother to the fucking Building 19 and have her shoplift a can of Spanish peanuts and you eat it in the parking lot. That was your idea of a fancy foreign meal. So, this is the guy, but he did buy me my very first dog. It was a good dog. I don't want to hear a word against my dog. It was a good dog. It tasted like veal. So then he bought me another dog. Oh, the veal crap got you. Oh, we don't do veal around here.
You need some new material, Francis.
New material? You never heard that one. I did that one once in 1988.
I'm Francis's older supporter here. See, Francis.
Whoa! See? That was 1988. You tell me why. Well, shit, man. Like I'm supposed to come up with an hour worth of new shit for the likes of you?
10-year-old stuff, your stuff can't recycle it. Just because you get me around.
Yeah, I know. It's hellish. Well, what is
Recycle.
Well, fuck off, you old channel. Just improv. Yeah. Right. Now, if you thought that was bad, just wait till you hear the improv stuff. Yeah. So, anyway, got another dog. He turned 21 recently. That's 3 in human years. So he gave him a birthday party in honor of his 21st birthday. Brought him a cake. We're alive. We're alive. So gave the dog a birthday party. Brought him a cake. Brought him candles. And because it was his 21st birthday, for a special treat, we poured a beer down the toilet bowl. Well, that dog got so excited, he ate the cake, he ate the candles, he set the house on fire, and we live in the forest now. And that damn dog still is better than I did.